Sci-Spi.tv proudly presents Lighten Up TV on the Perspectives channel.
Welcome to Lighten Up TV, enlightening, inspiring, and empowering humanity. This is a journey of self-discovery. On this journey, we are in search of answers to the burning questions that have intrigued mankind for millennia. Who are we? Where did we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going? By merging scientific discoveries with spiritual revelations, we will explore the possibility that mind and matter are one and the same in a vibratory field of pure consciousness. What if this eternally expanding field of consciousness is of and from the same source? These revelations, that we may actually share one mind in a unified field that expands into the cosmos, has the potential to cause a powerful shift in the collective consciousness.
Starring your host, Suzanne Ross, television personality and producer, inspirational author and speaker. She is a 5D truth seeker and spiritual pioneer on the front lines, raising the frequency of humanity. Through her shows, books, and events, she has dedicated her life to activating the matrix for global ascension.
Lighten Up TV presents an extraordinary trailer for a brand new movie called Extraordinary: The Seeding, followed by my interview with producer Jon Sumple. Enjoy.
The more that we actually learn about the world we're in, the greater the mysteries.
One in 50 American adults had experiences that could point to abduction.
It's extremely brave for someone to make their story public in this arena.
We'd look away and the ship would light up, and the next thing is just boom, it's gone.
Men and women have been taken for purposes of reproduction and hybridization.
I was abducted.
I wake up and there's such a bright light.
They would tell me to look in their eyes.
They're controlling your thoughts.
Inserting this gigantic tube inside of my body, it's painful. I'm now looking who this man is. He is inside of me. It's a screen image of the reptilian. They began the insemination process.
A new embryo is created, and that little hybridized embryo already formed is implanted in the womb, and she will gestate.
They always want the children fetuses.
I would go in for my appointment and there would just be no baby.
With a very long needle through the belly button, we'd go into the uterus and they would find the fetus.
It holds on to the fetus and pulls out.
And then they bring this little girl in the room.
And he said that she's yours.
This beautiful eyes, this face, and I see myself in the child.
She was emanating her feelings. I was shocked.
It was nobody's right to impregnate me and use me as a laboratory rat.
I went from 210 pounds to 115 pounds.
These beings that are doing the abducting don't have the same morality as we do.
They don't think what they're doing is wrong.
Hearing other people's accounts will make you go, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not alone.
Who are we serving? We need to ask those questions.
Look, human beings taken animals in the wild and bred them. Can we be bred into something different? The answer is absolutely, of course we can.
Educate yourself, be open-minded.
Don't be dismissive.
People have been taken.
You can't ignore this anymore.
Make up your own mind. Don't let anyone ever tell you how to think.
Sorry guys, not all ETs are good.
I am incredibly delighted to be here with Jon Sumple, who is one of the three partners of J3 Films. He and his partners produced and released extraordinary. The Stan Romanek Story, which I have watched multiple times. It was done incredibly well. And I am so delighted that that came out, because I'm sure that it answered a lot of questions for many people who believe they've had similar experiences. And it's just further disclosure. Now they have a second film in their trilogy, Extraordinary, The Seeding. And I am so very excited about the release of this film on September 3rd. Thank you so much for joining us, Jon.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for producing films that release disclosure that is so desperately needed. And it really brings together the community of experiencers. And it almost creates a support group for experiencers, those people that have the courage to come forward with their experiences with UFOs and alien contact, and now this whole hybridization and seeding program. So bless you and your partners for making such an effort to bring this out, Jon.
That was a main driver for us to do the film, because after we finished doing the first film, the Stan Romanek Story, we received so many private messages and emails from people who basically were saying, thank you for making me feel like, I'm not alone, or thank you for making me realize that I'm not crazy. I've had similar experiences too. The email, we had over, I think, 700 different messages just in Facebook alone from people who are saying about my experience. So when we started working on the second film, our objective really was to make a film that would resonate with not only with experiencers, but with people who don't quite understand how to deal with experiencers. So our whole motive behind this film, and when you see the film, you'll see that this is much more of a connection to the humanity elements as opposed to the evidence and the phenomena of lights in the sky and evidence surrounding an abduction. It's about the human experience and what the individual goes through.
And this process of extraterrestrial hybridization has been going on this planet for millennia. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think, for us to assume that we are alone in the universe, one, is, I think more and more people now believe otherwise because of information is being released on a regular basis, especially over the last few years. But the idea that there's evidence that shows that in pictures and cave drawings that there was the existence of these sky people. And I've spent a lot of time over the last year in Mexico, Peru, and Ecuador, and I've gone to a lot of indigenous anthropological sites and have seen a lot of evidence as well, and also have talked to indigenous people who have related stories to me about the sky people, and they all agree that they exist, and they all agree that they have visited. So there's an oral history that accompanies all of these different indigenous people. Their history indicates that there has been a presence from the sky people for a long, long time.
And not just a presence. Do they indicate that these may be relatives?
Well, I would say that the way that, when the different people that I've talked to, the way that they've talked about the oral history and how it's shared down, and it was almost as if it was common. It was a common interaction. It was as common as we would, you go out to the store and meet somebody. Not to say that it's I'm not trying to minimize it, but there was an involvement at a level of comfort and understanding. It wasn't fear-based at all. It was an opportunity to communicate with, people from above. They had no understanding of what space was. They had no understanding of the universe and how big and vast it was. They had an understanding of what they saw. They documented what they saw and what they experienced. And the oral history that has been passed along was, it's very much a part of our existence. So that gives you an indicator that it's been happening for, like you said, millennia, a long time. And there are stories that in each one of these indigenous tribes that don't necessarily make it out to the public, where they're like, oh yeah, this is a part of our existence. This is a part of our heritage. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. Here where I live in the desert Southwest, the Hopi mesas aren't too far away, and I know some Hopi elders as well as some elders from other Indian tribes, and they talk about these extraterrestrial beings as being their family members, as themselves being of Syrian, for instance, ancestry.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of it too is if you go back to look at our existence, and if we started from source, whatever you define that to be, the Big Bang Theory, if you have a religious perspective from it, whatever that might be, if we all came from the creator, the source, the beginning, then we're all connected. We're all brothers and sisters from the very beginning. So there is a ancestral, there is a genetic, a connection. I think we are all cosmic brothers and sisters.
Absolutely. I'm a fan of the Urantia book, which talks about the seeding, that there were actually 6 star races that came to this planet because this planet was classified as a decimal planet where life experimentation could take place. And these 6 star races actually imprinted their DNA codes upon this planet so that when life started to flourish, there would be this imprint of these 6 different star races, if you will. And then as humanity started to grow and flourish, you had these different races of beings that presented as different colors and ethnicities. So we could say we've maybe been seeded since the beginning of this planet's inhabitability. Now on to what's happening in the modern day, Jon. So let's dive into that and what actually modern day hybridization and seeding looks like.
Okay. Well, I think, we have this frame of reference from the 1940s to today. We don't have a frame of reference of what was before. We don't have a frame of reference of multidimensional existence. We can only look at it from an earthbound perspective. So that's all we know. So, when you think about it from a modern day, if we're talking about interdimensional, we don't know if it's interdimensional coexistence that is bending space-time. We have no concept of what that is. So we can only frame it, around what we can grasp in our minds. So some people have a better grasp of it than others because they've had experiences, if they've done the research, which is one of the reasons why we decided to make this film. And our goal is to reach the masses. So it's not about, creating a film that targets people who already believe or provides information to people who are plugged into this already. Our objective is to reach an audience that expands far beyond anything that's ever been put out there before, because we believe that the storytelling is emotional. It's about humanity. It's not necessarily about just the UFO phenomena. It definitely has a UFO element to it for sure because of the subject matter. But at the end of the day, when you're done watching the film, you'll realize that it's about humanity. It's about caring for your brothers and sisters. It's about what we can do to be better human beings for people who are experiencing that we may not understand. So the modern day, whole hybridization program, we talk about this all the time amongst ourselves. Jack and I have spent quite a bit of time talking about how does this all fit in? Where are we in this process? Where are we going with all of this? And I think, really there's different agendas. And one of the first things that I say to anybody that asks me about, what's your opinion? I said, well, it's only my opinion because there's no proof. We don't have, proof that this is what indeed is happening, but we have so many different stories, so many different people who have shared their experiences, and there's a lot of corroborative evidence that is shared in these stories that makes you, wonder, okay, if all of these different people at every corner of the earth, from people who are highly educated to people who live in tribes in the middle of nowhere with no access to the internet or connected to any grid whatsoever, are sharing similar stories. So how is it possible that those stories are the same if there's no storytelling there in the sense of someone sharing something for the purpose of gaining attention. So when you have somebody who's sharing a story in a remote area versus somebody who's sharing a story in a highly populated city, and there's corroborative evidence, and there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who have had those experiences and are sharing those experiences, we have to start looking at the experiences as evidence. I think it's very important that we don't discount somebody's story because there's no quote unquote empirical evidence to wrap your mind around.
Thank you for that. I remember Whitley Schreiber's first book was like a book that was always on one of our tables at our house growing up, because my father had an abduction experience when he was 18 years old and had 4 hours of missing time. And after that had a triangular shaped metallic object in his wrist. Mm-hmm. Growing up, he called it his alien chip, and he would hold it, So we had Whitley Schreiber's book about abduction in our house, and it was always floating around somewhere, and I would pick it up and look at it. But the most compelling aspect of that for my father was exactly what you just said, is that people from around the world in remote locations who couldn't possibly be talking to each other, sharing the exact same story. Very compelling empirical evidence.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked to Dr. Jacobs for our third film, David Jacobs, and one of the things that he said is exactly that, is that when people who say they need evidence, what is, thousands of people's stories that are corroborating evidence, sharing almost exact same descriptions of the process, the features, the look of the beings that they're encountering, the end results of their the experiences that they had. When there's so much, he says that's evidence. That we need to start looking at that as evidence, as opposed to relegating it to the fringes. It's important information. And one of the things that we hope to accomplish with this film is to achieve two things. One, make people who've had experiences feel comfortable telling their story, realizing that they're not alone, realizing that there is a tribe, there is a community for them to share those experiences. And two, for the people who may not understand it to say, now I have a better understanding. Now I need to be a little bit more compassionate towards those who've had these experiences, show a little bit more empathy. But we also think what's going to happen, because we've had at the different screenings that we've had, and we've shared with individuals to do a review on it, so many people have shared with us that it's having a trigger. It's triggering things with them where they're saying, okay, I am now questioning what happened to me when I had my experience with this. And some of these people have never had any contact experiences that they're aware of, but when they see something in the film that sounds similar to an experience that they had, they're starting to question whether or not their experience might have been otherworldly. So you're going to have people that are going to start thinking about their personal journeys, but there's going to be people who will say, I know somebody who went through something very similar to that. I wonder if they had that experience. So if we can start that conversation going where people start to share and start to ask questions and have a curiosity to learn a little bit more, then we've done what we set out to do, which is elevate the conversation.
Yes, and let's talk about some of your guest experts, because I know for myself, on point to what you just said, Yvonne Smith has been an incredible influence on my own awakening about my connections to extraterrestrial beings throughout my life, as a matter of fact, but particularly with the hybridization. When I went to see her speak at Contact in the Desert 2018, I had an experience of getting from Phoenix, Arizona to Palm Springs in 2 hours, which is impossible. And she was talking about how you can be taken while driving on the highway and actually put closer to your destination. Mm-hmm. And then my friend had this this shape that was like imprinted upon her leg. And she actually, Yvonne was saying that they can imprint you with shapes on your skin. Anyways, so I was fascinated by that and went to talk to Yvonne after, and she actually came back up to my hotel room and we did this whole interview together and discussion about it, which led to I not having children, choosing consciously at a young age not to have children in this life. I just knew I wouldn't. And then at the age of 30, starting to experience hemorrhaging, like waking up and just my bed was soaked in blood and thinking, my God, what's happening to me? Doctors having no answers for it. And exploring that with Yvonne and some of the medical things that were, that came up later, she said it's highly likely that you were being taken for hybridization, especially with the connection with my father being abducted and having this alien chip implanted in his wrist. And my whole life my father was always pointing up in the sky, so it's likely that there's a familial continuance of extraterrestrial contact and somehow being chosen, if you will, for this hybridization project.
There is a multi-generational element to this. That's one of the things that we found in talking with the different people that we've spoke to, is that it's not just a one and done thing. Usually it's something that has been happening generationally throughout their family. We've talked to people who've mentioned about, grandparents and parents and children all in a line that have had some sort of a contact experience. And one of the things that, as it pertains specifically to the women, is that one of the corroborative elements to the storytelling is that they don't remember anything until they have an event that, like you did when you were 30, that makes you wonder what is going on with me. Or they have a contact situation where they remember bits and pieces of it. And then they'll go and do a regression because they're curious enough to find out what that was. But what they find out, in women in particular, is that they're abducted at an early age, usually in that 5 to 7 range, and they're, for lack of a better word, tagged and monitored until they reach a childbearing age, when they're starting to menstruate and the eggs are they're fertile, and there is a reason for these aliens to start harvesting, or at least testing. So, when you think about some of these women that we've talked to, April is in her 40s now, I think. April, I apologize if you're not 40 yet, but I believe she is. But she's had her first abduction experience when she was 5 years old. So we're going back a long, long time. It's not like this just started happening. She had that experience when she was 5. Geraldine, when she got Geraldine Orozco, who's also in the film, when she got regressed, she found out that she was also abducted at a very young age. She didn't know anything until she had her first experience in 2013. And then through the regressions that she did, she found out that she had her first abduction experience at the age of, I think it was 5 years old. So that's a common theme, is the early abduction, tagged, monitored, some sort of implant placed so that they can monitor. And once they become fertile, that's when the process of the abduction start to occur, where they're harvesting eggs, creating I'm not, this is where I'm not an expert at, but there is some sort of intervention. There is some sort of introduction of either DNA from an alien species, or intervention of an egg that has already been impregnated through our traditional husband and wife, or roles, and they introduce some sort of an element to it. Then they monitor it, then they harvest it at a later date. So the kind of the pattern that you see is that women abducted early at a young age, monitored. Once they're fertile, they start having the abductions where they're having ovaries, taken away and then put back. We've had situations where women have said, I was never sexually active. We have one person in the film who was a lesbian said, I've never been with a man, have become pregnant. How are they becoming pregnant if they're not having what we would term traditional intercourse? So how is that happening? And then why is it happening that, 3 months into the term, all of a sudden they're not pregnant anymore? And when they go to the doctors have no explanation for it, other than they'll say something that the body absorbed the fetus, which to some women doesn't make any sense, because they're like, I woke up and I knew that the child was gone. It's like it was there yesterday and it's gone today. So those are the type of things when you start to hear those stories over and over and over again. And you mentioned Yvonne. Yvonne was the one that when we had the conversation with her, she's like, oh, this is happening. I've heard these stories hundreds of times. This is not something that's unusual. This is a common occurring thing in the public. So that's one of the things too, that as we started to talk about this and we started making this film, we started getting people saying to us, I've had something like this happen to me. So when we set out to make the film, we reached out to people like Yvonne to say, who do you know that might be willing to tell their story? So we kind of put this all call out to the people that we knew within the industry, within the ufology circles, to say, is there anybody that might be willing to talk about an unexplained pregnancy? And we interviewed over 30 different women and men, and not all of them were willing to go on the record with their story. But what it helped us realize in these conversations was that the corroborative evidence was similar from story to story to story. They were almost always identical in the process that led them to that, the early abduction, the fertile start having memories of being abducted in their teens, and then carrying it out all the way up until they're no longer fertile. So those are the type of things when you start to hear them over and over again. And 30 is not a sample that we can extrapolate to say this is happening, but we've also done a lot of research. We've talked to a lot of other people who said, I know people who've been through this, or I know somebody who's been through something very similar but doesn't want to go on the record and talk about it. So we've even talked to physicians too, trying to get one to go on the record to talk about this. We got that close. And we had one that was willing to say to us off the record that he is familiar with this. He's had experiences with women who have gone through this. He's not willing to, say that it's aliens. He said, but it's unexplained. It does not make sense as to what's happening. And the situations where women have tremendous scarring inside of their uterus. Why?
It's interesting that you should say that, because as you're telling me these stories, I'm of course recalling my own experience with these effects. Mm-hmm. And I went to a doctor because I was a personal trainer at the time. And so I had 6-pack abs, and suddenly I am blowing up like a balloon, and I'm going from size 2 to 4 to 6 to 8. And I'm like, what in the heck is happening? And is it just like bloating? And I went to a doctor who said, quote unquote, oh, this is really common for women who never had children. I thought, well, that's the most ridiculous answer I have ever heard. Okay. But now that you're saying that, I'm like, that's kind of interesting. This is common for women who never had children, bleeding out and bloating up. And, and then when I did finally get to a doctor who started to do ultrasounds and such, he found that there was so much scar tissue in my uterus. Ultimately, I ended up having a complete hysterectomy in the end, because it seemed like the only way to stop this. Stop what was happening. But even before the surgery, I then suddenly started to lose weight and got back down to, my regular size. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. And having conversations like this, though, things that we hope to accomplish is exactly what you're going through, is the curiosity of, well, I went through something that I really couldn't explain. I had a physician tell me something either very clinical, such as the baby being absorbed. There's another term for it, which is very clinical. And if they throw something like that, you'll probably just go, oh, my doctor's the expert. I've come to, rely on my doctors to provide me with expertise and okay, so that's good enough. And then when you start to hear that those are the stories that are told over and over again, it's likely because there is no precedence within the medical field. And again, I'm not an expert. If you're a physician and you disagree with me, that's completely fine. I'm not an expert, but I'm talking about the experiences that we've encountered and the things that we've read about and the research that we've done where women are sharing that, they're being told by their physicians that this is normal, and they're convinced that it's not.
Stay tuned for part 2 on Lighten Up TV, featured on the Perspectives channel of Sci-Spi.tv.